What if a book could see farther into your life than you ever could? And what if every quiet note written in its margins described the final moments of someone who had not yet died? In a forgotten corner of an old university library, a locked volume waited for decades, its pages heavy with humidity and silence. No one remembered who shelved it. No one remembered who sealed it away. Yet the moment the dealer cracked its spine, the air shifted like something waking up, and the margins, once pale and empty, began to look alive. Before we dive into the story, take a breath and steady yourself, because what you are about to hear concerns a book that should never have been opened, a book that twists cause and consequence until they are nearly the same thing. Some stories feel like they are watching you back, and this is one of them. So, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me the city you are watching from and the exact time you are seeing this. I am curious how far this video is reaching across different places. Now let's continue with the story. The dealer arrived just after dusk, his breath fogging in the late winter air as he stepped through the double doors of the ivy-strangled library. The building seemed older than the town, a structure that held its own gravity, as if every whispered secret trapped in the stacks pressed inward. He had been summoned by the head archivist, a woman whose voice quivered as she explained there was an item she wanted him to assess. She would not touch it herself. She only gestured toward the reserved reading room, then left him standing alone beneath a brass lamp that trembled faintly as if reacting to his presence. The book sat in the center of the long oak table, its leather cover mottled with mildew blooming like frost. A fragile accession slip rested beneath it, the handwriting thin and deliberate. The year indicated on the slip was written out in looping script, 1974. It claimed the book had never circulated. The dealer frowned, brushing dust from the spine. Something about the smell reminded him of a basement flood he had once seen swallow shelves of encyclopedias, a damp sweetness that clung to the back of the throat. He opened the cover slowly. The pages resisted him at first, stuck together by moisture and time. Then they parted with a soft sigh. What he saw did not make sense. Tiny handwritten notes filled the margins, spaced neatly alongside printed paragraphs. The ink had bled in places, but the dates beside each annotation were still legible. January 7th, 1982, March 4th, 1991, May 12th, 2005. Every note described a moment, not summary or commentary, but a scene captured with unsettling clarity. A breath held, a shoe slipping, a final sentence spoken in an empty hallway. He narrowed his eyes and read one aloud. She said she heard a knock just after midnight, but no one was at the door. The words felt too intimate, too close to tragedy. He turned the page quickly, his pulse tapping at his throat. The archivist had not mentioned annotations. She had said the book was sealed because of its age. Yet the ink looked fresh on some margins, darker than others, as if it had been added in stages. He examined the dates more closely and then froze. Each date sat exactly one day before the death described in the university's obituary archives, records he recognized from estate research he had done years earlier. His gaze drifted to the nearest stack, where rows of microfilm drawers slept like coffins. There had been a professor who died in 1991 after falling from the library balcony. One margin note described the moments leading up to that fall, ending with the chilling line. He said the rail felt warm, like a hand waiting to push. The dealer closed the book, but his fingers did not leave the cover. A faint vibration pulsed through the table. He told himself it was the old building settling. He told himself it was nothing. Yet the reading room lights flickered, steady at first then wavering, until the ceiling swam in a soft golden haze. He looked around. The room was empty, but he could not shake the impression that someone stood just outside the lamp's radius, watching. He opened the book again and leaned in as if compelled. The handwriting was consistent across decades, the same tilt, the same pressure, the same strange curvature of certain letters. No person could write the same way for more than 30 years without subtle shifts. Even the ink tone should have changed as pens evolved. But these notes felt as if one hand had written them all at once, across time without rest. A whisper seemed to rise beneath the turning of pages. Paper rubbing paper, cloth brushing wood. He blinked as the last section of the book revealed a blank page. The surface was pristine, untouched, yet he felt something emanating from it, a strange expectancy like an unfinished breath. The page almost seemed to glow under the lamp, a soft halo spreading outward. For a moment he imagined he saw faint indentations, as if someone had pressed a pen there but lifted it before writing. He shut the book quickly, his chest tightening. He slid the accession slip back under the cover and glanced over his shoulder. The stacks remained still, but a cold draft threaded between them. He told himself he should leave, return in daylight, and examine everything with a clearer mind. He took a step back from the table. Then something stopped him. A sound. A chair somewhere deep in the library easing across the floor. Slow, careful, deliberate. He reached for the book without meaning to and felt a tremor beneath his palm. The lamp flickered again, brighter this time, then steadied. He drew a breath that tasted of iron and dust. Whatever was waiting in the margins had not finished speaking. He catalogued each marginal note with a rhythm that felt like taking a pulse, hands moving while his mind measured the intervals between ink and event. The first entries were neat, almost academic, annotations that could be dismissed as curiosity. The later ones compressed into something urgent, shorthand for scenes rather than commentary. He read one aloud, voice low to keep from waking the building. She found the letter folded in the laundry basket at dawn. He did not recognize the handwriting, but he recognized the cadence of someone observing a private moment and recording the world's last breath. The dates stitched onto the margins matched obituary headlines he pulled from microfilm, each day preceded by a notation that described precisely the hour, the last words, sometimes even the weather. He watched his own reflection in the glass of the microfilm reader and felt it separate, as if the person who had written the notes were watching him from behind that mirror. He tracked a pattern, small but impossible. The ink on older margins had the feathery bleed of fountain pens. Then, abruptly, a modern script appeared with the clarity of a rollerball, yet it carried the same strokes and inflections. The same hand, or an imitation so flawless it felt obscene. He cross-referenced the phrases. A Marginalia line read. He counted the cups along the shelf, then stopped at 9. The obituary read he died after falling from his ladder. A fractured skull on a morning he was counting china before a lecture. Another note stated, she smelled smoke and walked back upstairs to look. The coroner's file showed she perished because of a kitchen fire she had returned to investigate. The margins rarely used names. They used scenes, intimate and specific, as if the writer had been present for each final moment. He asked the archivist about provenance. She avoided eye contact, fingers smoothing her cardigan as if rearranging the truth into a less dangerous shape. There is no lone history, she said. The accession slip was handwritten by a donor in 1974. The book was never formally cataloged. Someone locked it away in the reserved room and left an instruction not to circulate. Her hands trembled slightly when she spoke the year. "We found it during a renovation of the eastern stacks." He pushed further. "Did anyone note who sealed it? Any marginalia recorded before that time?" She replied, "No. The note was just placed in an envelope. No signature, no provenance beyond the donor note." When he asked whether the library preserved staff logs, she produced a thin bundle of yellowing notebooks. He flipped through them beneath the lamp. The staff entries were mundane at first: maintenance requests, shelving errors, a complaint about mice. Then, tucked among the dates, he found a line that did not match the hand of any archivist listed. It read, "The book writes in the margins at night. Wrote the assistant in 1984. The entry beneath it was crossed out. The ink smeared like water over blood. No signature followed." He felt the room tilt, as if someone had moved a shelf by a fraction. Back at the table, the dealer compared inks with a loupe. The same quirk appeared repeatedly, a small flourish on the T. He tested the paper with a fingernail. There were impressions on the pages, a faint indent trail beneath the top layer where a nib had pressed deep enough to mark the next page. It suggested urgency, a hand writing with more force than caution, as if the writer hurried to finish sentences before something caught up with them. He began to read the annotations against audio from old interviews he had requested. A retired groundskeeper's oral history mentioned a time when the stacks seemed to hum like a held note, and a former student recalled nightly scratching noises beyond the reading lamps. He listened and imagined the sound as friction, the friction of a pen drawing fate into being. He found a brief police interview from 1991 where a witness stammered. He kept saying the library watched him, like someone was taking notes. Her voice on the tape was small, ashamed, as if admitting complicity in an ugly secret. One evening, he stayed later than usual. The building emptied, and the hush thickened into something tactile. He read an entry that described a man who went to the river after dinner, a scribble about him watching the water the way one watches a wound. The date matched a drowning in 1989, a man from the faculty with no history of despair. The dealer closed his eyes to stop the world from tilting, but the margins did not rest. They layered detail over detail, offering the point of view of someone who had been present in private places. A last breath in a midnight corridor, the precise angle a head struck a banister, a whispered apology that arrived like a verdict. He began jotting his own notes, not in the book but in a small reporter's pad. He recorded the times he left the reading room, the faces he saw along the corridors, the scent of bleach and old paper. He cataloged his unease like evidence. Then, late one night, he opened the book and found a marginal note that unsettled him beyond the cold logic of coincidence. It was short, and the ink had a wet sheen as if still drying. It read, "He pauses at the map on the wall and checks the labels twice." He looked up at the library map near the reference desk. He had checked its labels twice earlier in the week, mapping routes between stacks because he had been thinking of where to hide a book if he needed to protect it. "Who else has seen this?" he asked the empty room, as if someone might answer. The walls absorbed the question and returned only a soft echo. He began to feel the margins chronology adhere to him. Small slips in his routine traced the rhythm of the annotations. A stain on his sleeve matched a blot on one page. A neighbor's coughing fit on a late-night walk matched a line about a throat that closed like a trap. He tried to devise explanations. Maybe a hoaxer with access to obituaries and a taste for cruelty had fabricated the notes. Maybe it was a serial forensic student testing the library's response. He chased each theory until they collapsed under the weight of the handwriting's invariance. The curious T, the pressured strokes, the way the ink pooled in the same place on each page. He stopped telling friends. When he spoke to the archivist again, she asked, "Do you think it predicts or records?" Her voice was not a question. It was an accusation aimed at the world for producing a problem with no reasonable origin. He had no safe answer. He only knew the book's annotations bent the chronology of the lives they described so tightly that the present began to feel like a hinge, opening and closing with each page he turned. At night, in the quiet moments when the stacks exhaled, he woke with the taste of ink in his mouth. He found himself dreaming of margins that reached out like fingers, tracing a face he had not yet seen, tracing the shape of events he would rather not imagine. He wanted to burn the book in the yard behind the library, to make ash of the thing that seemed to choose people and write their ends, but even the thought of flame felt calculating, as if the book would welcome fire as another kind of margin to mark with soot and charred prophecy. He kept reading. Curiosity had a gravity stronger than fear. Each annotation pressed a new question against him. What did the hand want? And why did it stop writing some names only to begin again, as if deciding whose life to follow? The answers did not appear in neat lines. They arrived in the small betrayals of the physical world. A page that smelled faintly of the river, a smear shaped like a fingerprint, a date that shifted when he blinked. He felt observed not by an individual but by the accumulation of the recorded dead. Their last gestures appended like signatures, each marginalia a small, cold hand tugging the present toward a geometry of endings. He told himself he could be careful, that foreknowledge was a burden he could shoulder if he kept his distance. He tried distance for 3 days, sleeping in a motel 2 blocks away with a cheap lamp that hummed. He left the book under the archival table where he had first found it, wrapped in its accession slip like a relic quarantined. Still, the margins moved closer. One morning, he opened a page and found a line that made his stomach drop. She drops the car keys, then bends to tie the loose lace. The note had a time precise to the minute. The neighborhood it named was the street he walked past every evening. The word for the woman was not a name but a small detail he could not have known. The particular way she clipped her nails while watching late news. He told himself this was coincidence until the woman from the note crossed his path 2 nights later. He saw her through the fogged window of a bakery, scraping sugar off a tray with the same motion the margin described. He froze, the world narrowing to the soft scrape, the tilt of her head. He remembered the minute on the page. He felt the book breathe behind his ribs. He thought, I can prevent this. The thought felt like prayer. He followed her after she left, keeping to the alleys so his presence would be invisible. The margins had never demanded names, only scenes, as if the writer wanted the final gesture rather than identity. She walked with a small dog, its collar jingling. He watched her cross the street, watched her drop her keys when a motorcyclist screeched like a sudden animal. The keys fell, the lace trailed, and she bent over precisely as the margin described. He stepped forward and shouted, "Watch out!" His voice sliced the night. She looked up, startled, and for a sliver of time everything relaxed, as if he had altered an equation by speaking. She smiled weakly at him, "Thank you," and straightened. He exhaled. The timeline seemed to loosen. He imagined the book closing in gratitude. He pictured the margins drying into inactivity, a malignant engine stilled by human intervention. He imagined the archivist breathing easier. For a moment, he believed the world might allow resistance. Then the dog barked once, sharp and high. A second motorcyclist, unseen, barreled onto the sidewalk, a small chemical hiss preceding the impact that threw the woman forward and then back. He ran, grabbing at her shoulder. Her head hit the curb at an angle the book had described with surgical cruelty. She coughed once, trying to speak. He held her hand and heard a sound like ink being poured slow and thick. She tried to smile and could not. Her eyes rolled up and away, and the exact line from the margin arrived in his head as memory and prophecy at once. The last thing she looked at was the lamplight on the pavement, and it was wrong. It was a shade the world did not have before the book wrote it. He watched the ambulance lift her away. Men with gloves moved like gears around a wound he had failed to close. People asked him questions he could not answer. "Did you see what happened?" someone asked, their voice thin. He nodded, and the nod felt like a confession. He had tried to change the scene and failed. The book had not predicted the knock at the door. It had predicted the falling. The margin had not lied. It had already included his interference in its description, as if the hand that wrote the note had folded his attempt into the narrative and had anticipated the exact words he would shout. Back at the library, the accession slip lay where he had left it, but the book's last page bore a new line in a darker ink. He called out and stepped into the act. The handwriting had the same curious T and the same pressure. He had never felt so small. He touched the word he had said aloud and felt the stain of inevitability. He tried then to refuse the book's gravity. He stopped sleeping in the motel and moved to a friend's apartment, a small place with cheap curtains and a plant that smelled like lemon. He packed a bag for the book and rehearsed shoving it into his trunk or mailing it overseas, into a time zone the margins could not reach. He tried to convince himself that objects do not hold intent, only people do. The thought collapsed under its own weight when he opened his pad and found a note written in his own hand, but not by him. It read, "Do not leave it in the dark. It will wait for light." He had not written that. He had not been near his pad since he'd left. The letters were his script, the same curve in the Y he used when tired. The sensation of someone else pressing a pen into paper sank teeth into him. He checked his pockets, his bag, his shoes. Nothing else had been touched. The pad sat open on his table like an accusation. He began to notice small correspondences between the manuscript's margins and the rhythm of his day. A page that mentioned a cracked mug appeared on a morning he reached for coffee and found his own mug split clean down one side. A note about a neighbor's cough became a sound from the apartment next door shortly after he read it. The book did not merely predict, it synchronized. Reading became a collaboration between his world and the hand in the margins. He started timing his readings, setting alarms, trying to outrun the notes by reading ahead. But the book seemed to anticipate tactics. When he read a line and then skipped forward, the skipped lines blurred in his memory and reasserted themselves in dreams like a chorus returning. Paranoia refined his senses. He listened for paper that was not his, for the quiet abrasion of a nib. He noticed the layout of rooms as if mapping escape routes for someone who might be pursued by ink. He could not bring himself to tell authorities because the book left no trace that could be admitted in court without sounding mad. He thought of the archivist and the crossed-out staff note about writing in the margins. He thought about the library's policy, the reserved room where dangerous things were to be kept, and he wondered who had made the rule to seal objects because they posed a threat to time itself. One night, while he slept fitfully, his phone lit with a message from an unknown number. A single sentence, no signature. It read, "Stop looking for cause. Look for consequence." He sat up so fast his head swam. The lamp in the corridor hummed as if confirming the text. He pressed the number and received only a static tone. He began to believe the book had a moral geometry he could not decode. The margins were not random cruelty. They were a ledger with its own ethics. It did not merely note death, it noted the last decisions people made before their end. It documented curiosity as a vector, a route that fed endings. The hand that wrote seemed to measure how people moved toward knowledge, and when it wrote them down, it closed the path. He felt watched not by an invisible eye but by a moral calculus that had turned itself into script. The last lines of his notebook, written in an unsteady hand that might or might not be his, read, "If knowledge is the lever, then looking pulls the fulcrum. Do not look." He read it twice and then 3 times, as if repetition might unmake the command. The book had already noted his reluctance, folding it into a margin that gleamed wetly like a recent wound. He returned to the library because the distance had become more suffocating than the place itself. Every hour he spent away made the world feel thin, like a sheet stretched over something waiting to break through. The book had begun matching his movements with unsettling precision, and the only place that felt honest was the same room where he had first opened it. The reading table waited beneath the brass lamp, the air around it thick with the sense of a held breath. He unwrapped the book and the accession slipped side against the cover. The last entry he had seen, written in ink that shimmered like oil, had echoed his own warning not to look. Now 7 new lines filled the final margins, each describing events in his building that had not yet occurred. A neighbor leaning over a railing, a kettle forgotten on a stove, a child dropping a glass toy on the stairs. He whispered, "How do you see this?" The library absorbed the words the way soil absorbs rain. He traced the page with one finger and saw the faintest indentation under the ink, as if this latest writing had been pressed with a force almost desperate. The pressure marks fell in a rhythm that reminded him of someone writing in the dark, testing each line like a pulse. He imagined a hand that had grown neither older nor younger, only more impatient. The room tightened around him. He brought out a stack of old interview tapes the archivist had let him borrow. One tape, recorded by a security guard decades earlier, contained a moment he kept replaying. A man breathed close to the microphone and muttered, "The pages turned, but I did not touch them." The guard laughed nervously, but on the recording, something shifted behind the man, a faint rasp like paper pulling free from paper. He played the tape in the reading room. When the voice repeated the line, the pages of the book on the table stirred, barely perceptible, but enough for his skin to prickle. The margins seemed to vibrate with the voice, aligning themselves with the sound as if responding to a cue. He paused the tape. The pages settled. He rewound and tried again. This time the top corner lifted, not from any draft, but as if acknowledging a name that had not been spoken. He shut off the recorder. Silence thickened. Then he noticed something new. A tiny tear near the spine of one page. A tear he did not remember. The tear exposed a sliver of paper beneath the top layer. He peeled it back gently. Hidden under the printed text was faint handwriting, older than the rest, almost erased by time. The ink had faded to a ghostly gray. He leaned in close. It read, "Do not try to save them. You only expand the margin." He jerked back. Expanding the margin, he realized, meant creating new space for the book to write. His intervention with the woman had not defied the script. It had enlarged its territory. By stepping into the scene, he had given the hand more surface to record, more consequence to capture. He began checking the earlier pages and found other hidden layers, faint and half erased. One read, "Stop tracing causation. Another said, "The margin widens each time you open the cover." He felt sick. The book had not only predicted events, it had documented every attempt someone had made to resist it, cataloging them as easily as deaths. Someone before him had struggled, scratched warnings into the paper, and then faded into the book's chronology. He wondered how many readers had vanished into the margins. The archivist's crossed-out note from 1984 suddenly felt like more than superstition. He flipped to a page from that era and found the faint outline of a fingerprint pressed into the paper, preserved like a fossil. His stomach tightened. The ridges belonged to someone who had touched the book with panic, someone whose hand had been still long enough to leave a perfect print. He imagined that person sitting exactly where he sat now, the lamp casting the same halo of trembling light, the shelves breathing behind them like a sleeping animal. He imagined them turning a page and seeing their own final moment described with the cold clarity the book favored. He wondered if the book chose them for reading it or if they were always meant to find it. That night, the library groaned as if shifting its weight. He felt the vibration through the floorboards, through the legs of the chair, into his bones. He read the latest marginal entry again. He returns to the source, hoping proximity is safety. The ink shimmered like a small bruise on the page. He touched it and felt a faint warmth. The warmth frightened him more than anything. Ink should not feel alive. He left the reading room and wandered into the main stacks, hoping the distance might offer clarity. But the stacks were worse. They formed narrow corridors that seemed to lean inward. A long row of biographies created a tunnel he had never noticed. He stepped forward and saw that the far end was darker than any unlit space should be. Felt like an unfinished sentence waiting for completion. He pulled out his phone for light. The screen flickered twice, then displayed a single notification from an app he did not use. The message read, "Turn back now." The sender field was blank. His heart hammered. He turned to retreat, but a book had fallen behind him, blocking half the path. He picked it up. It was the same title he had left on the reading table, but this copy had no mildew, no annotations, no accession slip. The spine crackled like fresh glue. He opened it. The pages were blank except for the center spread, where a single line sat in the middle. He discovers the mirror copy and realizes proximity is no protection. The ink was the same shade as the original Marginalia. He slammed it shut and stumbled back to the reading room. The original book waited exactly where he had left it. A new line now appeared on its last page, written in a slow, steady hand. "The mirror is the first warning, not the last." The air felt electrified, humming with a knowledge that had grown patient. The book did not care how frightened he was. It only cared that he kept reading. ChatGPT said, he realized the book had never wanted to predict anything. It wanted to narrow him, fold him, make him legible to itself. Each line it wrote was not foresight but consumption, a slow ingestion of every choice he thought he still owned. The mirror copy in the stacks had been the final confirmation. There were not two books. There was only one, extending itself through every surface it required, shedding versions like skins to trap him in its chronology. He returned to the reading table one last time. The lamp flickered with a quiet pulse, almost tender. The book lay open though he had closed it hours earlier. New ink glistened along the margin. He leaned in. It read, "He arrives for his conclusion." His conclusion. The wording stole his breath. Death was too simple. The book did not end lives. It documented the final decisions that shaped them. What it wanted was not his death but his capitulation. the moment he accepted the inevitability of his own transcription. He felt heat rise behind his eyes, the heat of someone being measured. He forced himself to look at the remaining blank space on the page. Only a few inches of white remained, a narrowing throat of possibility. He whispered, "What do you want me to do?" The question echoed into the stacks, leaking into the dark like a confession no one wanted to hear. The answer arrived in the form of a memory he did not own. A flash of a hand writing by candlelight. A whisper, "Look only at what must be written." A sense of someone who had struggled before him, someone whose final act had been to surrender to the script. He felt their exhaustion in his bones. Their fear had become part of the book's architecture. He tried to push the book away. It did not move. Its weight felt wrong, as if it rooted itself into the grain of the table. He stood quickly, but the air thickened around him, the shape of the room sharpening into angles he had never noticed. The library felt alive, not metaphorically but physically, like the building itself had become the book's spine. He heard a soft turn of a page behind him. He turned slowly. No one stood there, yet another book sat open on a nearby shelf, its pages curled with static. One line hovered at the bottom like an instruction. He must write what the margin cannot. He backed away, but the weight of inevitability pressed him forward. He picked up the pen he had used for his notes. His hand hovered over the page. The margin waited white and taut. He felt the universe contracting around that single space. He did not remember lowering the pen. He only felt the moment the nib touched paper and the world exhaled. His hand moved in small, obedient strokes. He wrote not what he wanted to write, but what the margin required. He wrote his final decision the moment the book needed to close its ledger. He did not read the sentence as he formed it. He feared that if he saw it, he would lose the last thread of himself. When he finished, the ink glowed faintly, then dulled into black. The margin was full, completely, irrevocably full. He closed the book. The lamp steadied. The air eased. He felt nothing. For a moment, he believed he had survived. Then he turned to leave and saw another book on the floor by the door, identical to the one he had just shut. Its cover pulsed softly, as if listening. He opened his notebook to steady himself. Every page inside was blank. Only the back cover held writing, a single line pressed with force. The ledger continues when the reader leaves the room. The lamp behind him clicked off. Darkness pooled at the edges of the stacks, thick and deliberate. He understood the truth with perfect clarity. He had not closed the book. He had opened himself. Before I let you go, listen carefully. Stories like this do not end when the video does. They linger. They watch. They wait for the next curious mind brave enough to follow the margins. So if you felt anything moving in the dark behind you while you listened, do not turn around just yet. Let the room settle, then click the like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to know who among you is still here, still awake, still reading the last line that should never have been written.